Hello, and welcome to today's Mission Nexus Communications peer-to-peer event. I'm Curtis Amundsen, the Communications Director for Mission Nexus. We're partnering with different people and organizations to discover topics and find effective presenters that will address ways mission agencies can improve their marketing and communication efforts. Before we get started with this webinar, I wanted to let you know that Mission Nexus has a cohort for communications directors and staff members. If you're involved in marketing or communications with a mission agency, this cohort is for you. It's a great place for you to meet, learn from, and be encouraged by others in your field. At the end of the webinar, I will give you instructions on how to find and sign up for this cohort. Today's presenter is Heather Pubols of Le Motif. Heather is the founder of Le Motif, a ministry that helps organizations and networks tell their stories effectively. She previously served nearly 20 years in various communications leadership roles with Wycliffe Bible Translators USA and Wycliffe Global Alliance. Her missionary communication responsibilities have taken her to more than 50 countries. She and her husband, Jeff, lived and served in 4 countries abroad and currently reside in Massachusetts. As a reminder, please put your questions in the chat panel as you think of them. We'll get to as many of those as we can throughout the webinar. Heather, it's great to have you here with us today. Welcome. As a way of introduction, can you share a little bit about what led you to work in communications? Has storytelling always been a passion for you?
Sure. Yeah, happy to tell you that. Storytelling has been a part of my lifeblood. I'd say I come from a family on both sides of my family of storytellers. Maybe it's our Irish and Scottish heritage. And as I grew older, I got involved in student newspapers and studied journalism and public relations, and just began exploring how I could use what I had trained in college for ministry, and happened upon an open position with Wycliffe, and that's how this whole journey began. So yeah, would you like me to get started, Curtis?
Yeah, take it away. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Curtis. And today I'm going to be talking with you about how you can tell dangerous stories. In other words, how you can safely share sensitive information in public media. In 2015, the refugee crisis in Europe exploded. I was living in Germany at the time and began to research for potential articles that would link the work of several organizations that are a part of the Wycliffe Global Alliance to that topic. I learned about a man working for one of these organizations who came to Europe as a refugee more than a decade before the crisis. Fearing for his life, he fled from his home country in West Asia and entered Europe illegally. His story echoed refugees' experiences at that time. On top of that, his refugee journey included a significant encounter with one of Wycliffe's organizations. It changed the direction of his life and engaged him in work that connected him with current refugees. It was perfect. It was my perfect story. However, even though he was a legal German resident, the kind of work he did carried risk. We could say he was in Germany, but his identity and country of origin needed to be concealed. In a conversation with some colleagues, I said, I know how we can tell this story. Someone did something that brought about a positive change among some group of people in some country, and it's so amazing. Everyone needs to know about it. We both laughed, knowing that finding a way to tell the story safely was going to be challenging. What could we do to tell the story and mitigate the risk? If putting details in a story threatens the project you want to write about or risks the lives of your subject, should you even try to tell it? If you do try, will you end up with a story so generic it won't even be worth sharing? In this webinar, you will learn about why it's worth it to try to tell dangerous stories, how to do it well, and then I'll take you through several case studies to apply what it is we're going to learn together. So why is it worth it to try? Before we talk about anything else, let's acknowledge that the risks are real. At the very least, exposure of certain information may cause embarrassment and harm to relationships on the ground. And that's just the mildest of issues. The threats can escalate to a project closing down, a person or people becoming isolated from their community, workers being expelled from an area or country, all the way to someone's life being threatened or taken. Exposure can happen in a variety of ways and stories. Here are the main ones. Keyword searches on search engines, and so somebody can put in a keyword and find your story. Image searches, particularly facial recognition, and this continues to improve and make it harder to hide places. You might also consider that audio search or voice search is likely in the near future. In the past, some organizations have put more sensitive information in print-only publications and sent that out to a lot of people. And this is one way to handle sensitive information. But I don't want you to get too complacent about that, because anyone can take a picture of a page in that publication and post it to the internet for the whole world to see, and then you've blown your cover. So don't think of this as the perfect fix. Colleagues on the ground who live in these dangerous contexts every day will likely feel weary of any attempts to talk about what they're doing. The risks are personal to them. As a communications person, you do not want to become a source of friendly fire that could hurt them, the communities they serve, or the work being done. These challenges, listening to all of them, they may start to feel insurmountable. Complete silence seems safest. However, that represents a pole or an extreme view that creates a false dilemma. And the choice you think you have is that you either have to share everything or you have to share nothing. So let me tell you, my friends, there's actually a lot of room between those two poles. And with some creativity, you can find something that can be shared. And this middle road is not only possible, it's also safer, because saying nothing at all is in fact also risky. Why is that? It leaves your constituents ignorant about important parts of your work. And when you say nothing at all, someone else will educate them, and you may not like the way they do it. It can actually have disastrous consequences. This is the internet age. Ignorant allies, curious reporters, and angry detractors all have access to the same media tools that you do. And in a second, any of them can harm you accidentally or on purpose using a social media channel like YouTube. Because of internet archiving tools, that damage may never disappear. Warren Buffett says it takes 20 years to build a reputation and 5 minutes to ruin it. If you think about that, you'll do things differently. Reputation damage can impact giving, recruitment, the willingness of people to pray, and may even cause your organization to close. It's a serious risk. But when you put the effort to carefully communicate even the most sensitive topics, you can get to tell your own story. You can educate your constituency from your knowledge and experience, and this increases accountability and trust. This puts you also in a much better position to minimize the scale of damage if sensitive information is exposed. Everyone doesn't need to know everything, but everyone should know something. All right, so how do you do this? Matthew 10:16 says, I am sending you out like sheep among wolves. Therefore, be as shrewd as snakes and as innocent as doves. So how can you practice these characteristics of snakes and doves? We're going to begin with a few things to get you started, and then we're going to talk about some wide view approaches, and then bring everything together using a technique that I call framing. And after that, we're actually going to look at several case studies together to apply the things we've learned. All right, so your two starting points are research and relationships. Your research needs to begin with discovering the issues that make a story dangerous, a dangerous one for your organization. Sensitivities usually fall within these three categories: government restrictions, cultural prohibitions, and civil unrest or criminal activity. Look at where your organization works and learn more about what specific issues impact each place and how they play out on the ground for your organization. The chart on the screen provides an example of how you can do that. And I've listed 2 countries here just to get you started with how you can think about this. The country of Kenya, you can see they don't have any restrictions really for religious freedom provided by the government, but there are some people groups that expect people to all conform to one faith that are a part of their community, and that faith may not be Christian. There's also some areas where there's some terrorist activity in parts of the country, which makes it hard to talk about those parts of Kenya. Now, another one may be more obvious as a sensitive place, and that's China. They do have restrictions on religious freedom provided by the government. And culturally, Christianity can be seen as foreign or maybe Western. But civil unrest and criminal activity are not a significant hindrance to the kinds of things that we do. So this is something that you can put together as you're thinking about different places. You'll also want to research public information on the location as well as its Christian history, and we'll come back to that soon. Your research needs to happen in tandem with building relationships. I cannot emphasize that enough. People who face personal risk to do their work will never let you talk about anything related to what they do if they do not trust you. Sometimes people work under such extreme restrictions that they don't even want their colleagues to know who they are. That is a formidable barrier to building relationships. So start with finding intermediaries. And that could start with your organizational leaders. You could ask them to introduce you to different people who might introduce you to others. It could also be connecting with people who used to work in a restricted location but no longer do. Maybe they're retired, or maybe they moved to a different field, or they returned home. Take time to meet those people, listen to their fears, their challenges, their experiences, learn a bit about their context. Sometimes they have code language that they use with each other to sort of protect what's on the ground. Learn some of that if you can, if they'll share that with you. Demonstrate understanding and trustworthiness. And as you build these relationships, you'll gain more access to stories and more trust from your colleagues to share them well. Now let's take a look at a couple of wide view approaches, ways that you can talk about sensitive places without getting specific about what it is that you do. The first approach I'll talk about is the public information approach. There's all kinds of information that is open to anyone in the public. And sometimes I find it silly that agencies are afraid to talk about some of those things because it's out there. You can use that information to inform your constituents about different parts of the world that relate to your work in some way, but you can do it without saying that you work there. Or maybe you talk about a neighboring country near where you work, just to provide people with a bit of the context of what that part of the world is like. You can share information like their form of government, their population statistics, what religions are there, how many people follow different religions, maybe some of their cultural practices, their national holidays, people groups, or the number of languages. If it's publicly available, in some places you can talk about whether or not they have a Jesus film or a Bible in their languages. You can always add a call to pray with these places as a simple action step that doesn't need to be threatening. Another approach is to look at history. Christian missions work has a history that is thousands of years old. Many places that are restrictive today may not have been 50 years ago, 100 years ago, 1,000 years ago, or 2,000 years ago. For example, parts of the Middle East and North Africa have rich ancient Christian heritages. The early church father Tertullian came from Tunisia, for example. The apostles Paul and John both taught and evangelized in Syria and Turkey. We can think about government restrictions in places like China and North Korea. But not that long ago, even just 100 years ago, they didn't have those kinds of restrictions. And so someone like Hudson Taylor, who used to work in China, you could talk about what he did or people like him. Actually, it's crazy, but this is also true, that in the early 1900s, missionaries that lived in Pyongyang used to call it the Jerusalem of the East. So there's actually historical stories from that location that can be told too. You may be able to combine current facts with information about historical Christian movements, and by doing that, you show your constituencies both when the seeds of the gospel were planted and the current challenges. That gives people a very different picture than just these people are all lost, or it's impossible to go there, or everything about that place is a secret. In both of these approaches, you educate your constituency about parts of the world that you may not otherwise talk about due to security concerns. By sharing something, you keep yourself from the risk of a conspicuous absence. But what about when you want to share an actual person or project or organization that a project that your organization is involved in? This is when you want to use a strategic omission approach. You want to carefully select what you share and don't share while keeping the essence of the story intact. And that leads me to a technique that I like to call framing. So here's how framing works. First, I want you to think about the viewfinder in a camera, and that is your frame. You want to fit everything you can say within your frame, and what you can't say should go out of your frame. So it's not going to show up in your picture. In many dangerous stories, names, locations, and faces and other identifying features are kept out of the frame. Instead, pseudonyms, the geographic region, obscured visuals, and non-specific languages are used in the frame. But notice that your ability to remain focused on the story does not change. When you approach a story like this, you can go through a process of zooming in or out until you find an acceptable frame to both tell and show the story. So let's talk about personal names just a little bit. So let's say the name that can't be used is Jane Smith. So instead of using her whole name, you can start by zooming in to her first name, maybe just Jane. But sometimes that's not adequate to maintain security. So you can go the other way. You can zoom out a little more, and you can try a pseudonym from Jane's ethnic community or home region. Maybe you could use the name Jill, for example. Sometimes even that's not enough. So you need to zoom out again and try a name from another language or region as a pseudonym. I often choose Bible names when I get to this point. So in this example, maybe we could use Sarah. The same process holds true with locations. Let's talk about the country of Algeria, for example. Now, if you were to go back to that chart we had up before, there would be a lot of different restrictions there. If a country's name can't be mentioned, zoom out to the geographic region. In this case, it would be North Africa. If that's not enough, zoom out to the continent. And in this example, that would be Africa. Now, let me just jump back to something that we were talking about before, since we're talking about Algeria. Algeria may be a difficult place to share current stories from, and maybe we can use this zooming method to do that. But there's also a historical connection, because did you know that St. Augustine came from there? So there's another great example of a place where a historical story could be useful, especially if it's coupled with current facts. All right, back to framing. You can use this exact process for determining other vocabulary that will be written or spoken, like people group names. Maybe you use a pseudonym instead. Or when it comes to names of religions, maybe you use the term majority religion or major world faith instead. All right, so when it comes to visuals, you can follow a similar process, and that would apply to video footage and photographs. When you are capturing an image of a person, start with making sure their face and any identifying markers like tattoos or noticeable scars are not revealed in any of your pictures. So that's the starting point. Clothing that does not identify your subject with the place you don't want others to know about also helps. From there, you want to zoom in very close, like here's a picture of someone's hands. That's a good, very close image. Zoom out very far. Here's the same person from quite a distance. It's more of a landscape picture. Or you can get them from above, or you can also take a picture from behind or get video footage from behind. Another option is to use an illustration, or you could use a representative person, somebody else from the area, but not your main person, or even an amateur actor, especially for video footage. In fact, an amateur actor can provide a voice for narration, or could provide the voice for anyone who's interviewed. So you could replace their audio with somebody else's voice. If you do use a representative person or an actor, it's important to always indicate when you've used that in your thing. So whether it's a footnote or it's just a little note on the screen, if it's a video, or if it's an audio saying the people or voices represented here are actors, that's an important thing to do to make sure that you're being ethical. When you show a location, we're going to go through a very similar process. You start with avoiding visuals of landmarks which identify the place you are trying to keep concealed. So if you were wanting to tell a story, let's say from New York City, you're not going to want to have any pictures of maybe the Empire State Building or the Statue of Liberty. That would be obvious in that case. Then you can zoom in on illustrative objects. And sometimes these objects may not even be in the place where the story is about. You can just say, this is a good visual that, kind of illustrates the story in some way. Or you can zoom out and show a wide landscape. In fact, you might even show a landscape that's similar to the place that you're talking about, but it is in an entirely different place. Think about it. Hollywood does this all the time. They shoot things in one place, and in the story, it's actually somewhere else. The deserts of the southwestern part of the United States are the scene for a story that takes place in the Sahara Desert, for example. All right, so now we're going to get into talking about a few case studies. All right, so I have 5 of them. I think we've got time for all of them. As we look at each of these, I want you to think about what details are left in and what's left out to make the story safe for public consumption. Our first case story is the story From Atheism to Bible Translation. The names in the story have been changed for the safety and protection of the people featured, as well as the work that they do. Reza grew up in an Islamic nation, but never personally embraced the majority religion of his home country. In university, he vocally declared himself an atheist. His viewpoints caught the attention of the police, and that led to his arrest. After 3 months in prison, he returned to his parents' home with a bruised face. Soon after, he fled to Germany, becoming a refugee. He took a job in a fast food restaurant where he met other refugees. One of his refugee co-workers, Arif, boldly shared about his faith in Jesus with Reza nearly every day for 2 years. One night, a restless Reza left the crowded refugee camp where he was staying to search for somewhere else to go. He saw a sign advertising a church prayer meeting focused on his home country. Out of curiosity, he decided to check it out. Upon arrival, he was surprised to see Arif, his Christian friend from work. Arif told Reza that the group had actually just prayed for him. That night, Reza made a decision to follow Jesus. Around the same time, Reza met Robert, a Wycliffe staff member working to translate the Bible with refugees who speak elegant. This language is spoken by millions in Reza's home country. Robert invited Reza to participate in the project, and Reza agreed. Today, Reza is the project manager for the Elegant translation. Together, the team has translated the Gospel of John, the Book of Acts, the story of Joseph, and the story of Abraham. Other scripture portions are in progress. Reza says his work is sustained by his vision to see more people from his home country know and experience God just like he did. You can find more of this story online at the address on your screen, and that's wycliffenewsnetwork.exposure.co and /from-atheism-to-bible-translation. So I have an opportunity for you to respond in the chat. What did you notice from this story? And also, if I didn't mention it already, this is an abbreviated version of that story I talked about right at the beginning, the one that I really wanted to talk about, but I didn't know how. So it was possible. All right, so in the chat, post your comments. What do you notice about that story?
So Lori says that the fake name of the language, calling it elegant, is one thing.
Right.
Jay says religious settings, general photos.
Yep.
Mary notes that there was no specific country mentioned.
Yep, very good.
Susan also says the name of the people, name of language, name of country of origin were probably obscured.
Yep, very good.
And Daryl says he sees lots of framing.
Yes, excellent. Great, you guys are getting this. I did. I see, Lori, you've noticed that I did say Islamic nation. Yep, it was one of the things that we agreed upon, that since there was no other notable things where Reza was, that was okay to say. That was something that we agreed upon with the people working there. Yep. And it's something for you to think about too, as you're working on this. Maybe you might be surprised what actually can fit into the frame. All right, we're going to go on to our next example here. The next one is a case study. It's a video called Walking in Shadow, and it offers a glimpse into the life of coastal African Muslims. Let's see if I can get this up here.
sandals, I must first put on the right foot. When I enter the mosque, I must enter first with the right foot. When washing before prayer, I must wash my right hand, then left hand. Then the feet, starting with the right foot. Only after I am completely clean can I pray. And when praying, I must stand foot to foot so that the devil cannot enter through the gaps. 5 times a day I pray and follow these rules because I am a Muslim. I have always been a Muslim. My family, my friends, everyone I know has always been a Muslim. We know of no other way. I live beside the ocean. I am a fisherman. I rise early every morning with a call to prayer and go out on my boat. I love the ocean. It brings me peace and it helps provide for my wives and my children. I return to sell my catch at the market. I bargain for the best price, but there's no bargaining with fate when I catch nothing that day. If Allah wills that I catch nothing, then who am I to question his judgment? And yet, there are even more important questions that I'm not supposed to ask. I hope I'm a good Muslim, for someday I will be judged by Allah. I'm fated to go to heaven or to hell, but I cannot know which. It's a terrible thing not to know if my life of following the rules of Islam will be good enough. I try hard. I say the Shahada. I do the prayers. I give to the poor. I fast. But is it enough to earn Allah's mercy? I cannot know until it is too late. I used to feel peace as I watched the sunset. But now, at the end of the day, as the shadows grow, so does my uncertainty.
Okay, so that was our second video. Tell me what it is that you noticed about it.
So Jeremy says it's very humanizing and creates empathy.
Great. Yep. What did you notice fell in the frame and what fell out of the frame? They are pretty open and they are showing a mosque. Yep.
And Mary mentions no names were used. There are lots of close-ups. Gary says there were lots of faces in the frame.
Yeah. So we have a lot of people, but there's no one specific. It was a place where they had permission to go to a mosque, and it was in a place where they were not working.
I noticed that there wasn't a country specific use. That was probably because they were trying to target more broadly than a specific country.
Yep, just to tell the story overall. Yeah. They did use a voice actor for the narration. It does not have an addendum to tell you that, but it's narration, which you typically wouldn't do that for because we're not identifying a particular person or telling you that it's his story. Yeah. All right, we're going to go on to our next case study here. And if you want to find this video, you can see it on vimeo.com/6678962. All right, so the next case study is an inspiring image called Finding Jesus. So this was originally posted as a photograph with a short descriptive text on one of Wycliffe's websites and on their social media channels. And we'll take a look at it. So here's the photo. And this is the text that went with it. A group of Tajik men and women work together in a field. The landlocked country of Tajikistan is full of rugged mountain ranges which rise up in all directions. In fact, more than 90% of the country is covered by mountains. Tajikistan has become a popular destination for hikers and climbers, but with flat land at a premium, it has become increasingly difficult for Tajik farmers to gain access to quality farmland. As a result, Tajikistan relies heavily on support from Russia. Roughly half of the Tajik economy is built on the wages earned by labor migrants abroad. More than 1 million Tajiks are currently living and working in Russia. In preparation for life as a migrant, young Tajiks are taught Russian in hopes of obtaining a job once they are older. Although the Christian church in Tajikistan is small, many Tajiks have encountered Christ while working in Russia. Others have reported seeing Jesus in their dreams. The people of Tajikistan need your prayers. And then on the website, there was a link to click on for prayer points. So what do you notice about this one, this photograph with some information?
Gary says that there was a lot of current information used in that's publicly available.
Yep, excellent.
Susan says that it had a lot of country info. Multiply Team mentioned historical and public information as well. Let's see, Project Ablaze mentioned wide shots and the identity of the people can't be noticed. Kathy mentioned 2 countries were referenced, so they used broader geographical context as well.
Yeah. So the idea there was just to tell constituents about a country and help them learn about it. help them get an idea of what this place is like and personalize it a little bit and encourage them to pray. Excellent. Let's move on to our next case study. This one is calling Following God's Call. Small in stature, quiet and unpretentious, Ruth prefers blending into the background. She doesn't like being in front of people, but her humble presence puts others at ease. While Ruth's home country has few Christians, she grew up in a Christian home. In high school, she began to see her parents' faith as her own. After attending university, Ruth married. Her and her husband started their family, and then he began to teach at a Christian school. Ruth met Gary there. He was helping the school with a special project and asked Ruth if she'd be willing to work with him on it. Her work quickly shifted from the school to Gary's global work. She met people from all over the world and learned about unreached people groups for the first time, and some of those unreached groups in her own country. Then, in a meeting with Gary, an opportunity to lead a team recording the Bible surfaced. She found herself blurting out, "Why not?" That slip of the tongue, as she calls it, landed her a new job. I didn't apply for it, she reminds. A few years later, her colleague Rudy sensed God telling him to offer Ruth more responsibility. A team working with a large people group with few followers of Jesus was caught in conflict, constant conflict. They needed a partnership facilitator that could bring unity to the group. Rudy asked Ruth if she could do that. After asking God to find someone else, she reluctantly agreed. But over time, she and Rudy realized God had prepared her for this. Without a role as a pastor or organization leader, no one on the team saw Ruth as a competitor. The team began to work harmoniously under her guidance. By December 2019, they celebrated 20 baptisms over the previous 2 months. These baptisms confirmed to her that God has her in just the right place. She says that he has guided her step by step as she has obeyed his leading. So you can find more of that story up at laymotif.org/stories. And the names in that story have been changed for safety and protection of the people featured, as well as the work that they do. So what do you notice about this one? Tell me in the chat.
So Susan says that the details were obscured. The main characters' faces were not shown, and part of the names were as well. Project Ablaze says no faces were seen. Medium to close-up shots were used, and it was a generic name. No name was mentioned of the school, and they used illustrations when showing the front of the face. Mary mentioned it's a very generic location, and Laura said there was no specific country or people groups mentioned.
Yep, great. Yeah, you guys you're getting this, but we can still get a sense of a little taste of Ruth's story. If you read the article, you'll get even more. So we have one more case study. This is a video. We're only going to watch 5 minutes of it, and then I'm going to go to our Q&A time. But you can find this at somalistory.com, and I'll mention that again after we watch it. As we get to this final case study, this video, it's called I Against My Brother. I want to give away 2 pieces of information straight away. There's no mention of any organization, and there's not on the website or on the video, and they've used amateur actors. But I want you to see it to get a sense of what could be possible. Right, so let me pull that up.
aniga ma ku sheegi karo magacayga way haddaan idin tusiyo waxyaalaha aan sameeyey ayaa reerkayga loo dilayaa. Aniga ma kuu sheegi karo magacayga, laakiin waxaan u baahanahay inaan kuu sheego sheekadayda. They call me kafir, an unbeliever. This is my story. I'm a Somali, born and raised in the Horn of Africa. To be Somali is to be a Muslim. Our religion is our culture. Somali people are very close. We share everything. In our house, we had only one room, and there were 7 of us. We all grew up together, cousins, aunts, uncles, grandparents. We don't belong to our parents only, but to all our relatives, the whole community. Even those who are far, we are still part of each other. We depend on each other. When I was in secondary school, my father died. My uncle in the US took over the responsibilities of my family. He provided our food, our schooling, everything. This is our custom when the father passes. My uncle brought me to the city to live with his family, those who remained in Africa. He chose me out of all my brothers and cousins because he believed in me, that in the future I will be something. I will change the family, the community. Some people thought this was a mistake. They said, keep her in the village, find her husband. In the city, she might lose her way. In some ways, they were right. It was there, in that city, I met some people who would change the course of my life. I'd always been taught that everyone who is not Somali is Christian, that the evil we see on TV and movies is because they are Christians. But when I met my new neighbors, they were different. They called themselves Christians, but weren't drunkards or adulterers or immoral like I was taught. Even though they didn't know me, they welcomed me, sharing their home with me. I started thinking, no, we should be Muslims because we are very good, more than even a Muslim. I told them this and I started thinking, if these people are really Christians, what was it that I was told? Before every meal or activity we had together, we prayed. And for me, it was the first time I had seen that. It was different than what I had seen on TV. Sitting with them and listening and seeing it, I realized I wanted it. That's how I wanted to pray. That's how I want to do it. Except the part at the end where they said in the name of Jesus. That's the part I struggled with. They prayed about everything in their life, like they were talking to someone they knew, like a father. This led to many discussions about religion, about who God is, about who we are. They would ask me questions about Islam. I would ask them questions about Christianity. I would say, no, that's not Christianity. Then they would refer me to the Bible. We would read it together. But soon, I wanted to know more. I wanted to read it for myself. I asked for a Bible of my own. I read it in secret. And I remember I would read and read and read, and I just wanted to go on and on. But I struggled with who Jesus was. I was always taught that God is one. For God to have a son, that's blasphemy. He would have to marry, have a wife, and that's impossible. For me, I could not even listen to it. In the Quran, Jesus was only one of the 25 prophets of Allah, and God is completely different from the prophets. He is above the prophets. I cannot talk to him the way I talk to a person. In the Bible, they talk about God as somebody who really loves and cares about them and is with them. It's like a parent and a child. But for us, God cannot be like that. He is far from that.
All right, so I am gonna move on from here. So if you want to find that, and you want to watch the rest of it, you can find it at somalistory.com. So what did you notice about this one?
Terry asks whether this story was written by a Somali person or if their story was being told from someone in the West.
I am not sure. This is not something that I was personally involved in, but I think they interviewed several people, including the main character in the real story, in order to put this together. But I believe the production team was Western.
Mary mentions that it was totally about the culture and their
Yep.
Yeah, the culture there.
Yeah, great. We have, there's a lot of very in front of us parts of the story, but we don't know, where it's coming from, or just that I see somebody's noticed that the website is registered in Iceland. All that is intentional. Yep. But it's a way that a story from a sensitive part of the world could be told. So let me just finish this up here. As you can see from all of our case studies, it is possible to find acceptable ways to tell dangerous stories without compromising security. You may still find stories that are too risky to tell, or maybe are too hard for your organization to work out how to tell them. But by using public information, history, and framing, I think you'll find there are many more stories that can be told than not. So let's review what we've covered. We've learned about why it's worth it to try to tell dangerous stories, how to do it, and we've also seen several examples of how others have told these types of stories in case studies. You no longer need to be stuck in the false dilemma between sharing everything or sharing nothing. You are now equipped to share something. Thank you for your participation today. If you'd like to connect further with me, my web address and email address are on the screen, and I'm open to take questions.
Well, while people are putting their questions into the chat box for Heather, I've got a question for you to maybe start us out. Do you have any suggestions on how to get all team members on the same page with what is appropriate to share in different contexts? So maybe different parts of the leadership have different perspectives on what to share. Some would share more, some would share less. Do you have any advice on how to bring the whole team together on determining what to actually share?
Sure. I think a great way to do that is to start with writing down your guidelines and to have everybody review those guidelines. And then you can make those compromises together, and then you have a document where you've agreed on things. There may be exceptions along the way to different parts of that where something may make sense in one context and not another, and your guidelines need to shift for one story. But yeah, I'd say get your protocols on paper. What other questions?
Awesome. We got a question from Susan. She says, is it acceptable to use stock photos and footage? We have stories, but have a hard time getting visuals from our partners.
Yeah, I definitely think that that is acceptable. Of course, you need to find out what the local laws are around using stock images and photos and what permissions are required. But many countries at least have a more open policy about non-commercial photo and video use. and editorial use. If it's commercial, that's much more strict and you have to make sure that you have permissions. But yeah, you can do that. You can use more stock pictures. If you're using a number of stock pictures with an article that's written, you can have a note that just says, you know, the people in the story are representative. That's helpful to have. But yep, that's a good approach. What other questions?
Question from Mike. He asks, are there any suggestions on working with teams or people who are very paranoid about their stories being told, even when you take all these precautions?
It's tough. You know, I think you need to start with the people that are open and welcoming. I mean, I've worked with the whole gamut. I've worked with some people that basically we had to give up because it was just too hard. And like I said in the beginning, you know, there are reasons why people do have that paranoia and fear because they're living in these restrictions all the time. So I think we want to show them as much kindness as possible. But I also recognize that it can feel like they're trying to keep you from doing your job or making it impossible. But I would say pray and ask the Lord to help you find where people are willing and where there's even the tiniest open door, and start there. Sometimes what the people who are most fearful need to see is that someone else has gone ahead of them and found a way to make it work.
A question from Margaret. She asks, how dangerous is it to include some audio of someone talking in their native tongue? Will that give away the country if you only use a few seconds of it?
It depends on how secret you're wanting the location to be. It can be. I mean, I went out to a refugee camp in the Sahel, and we were able to come up with some protocols to be able to talk about this place. But I blogged about it on our personal ministry blog, and I had people from the community who were diaspora who responded, who found it because they're very community oriented. So I would just be cautious, just be careful. Sometimes that may be okay and other times it may not be, but find out from people on the ground if that could work.
Another question from Virginia. She asks, do you suggest any standard forms for gathering protocols from workers? What about written cautions for workers and supporters to keep in mind for back and forth communication?
You know, Ellen Livingood of Catalyst International, Catalyst Services rather, she's created a great document. It's designed for churches, but I think it would work for some organizations as well. That you can, it's designed like when you go on a short-term trip and you know, you need to give people some guidelines about talking about things that they've seen afterwards. It's helpful to provide people with some guidelines to know that stuff up front. You know, sometimes donors get, especially major donors, get privileged information more frequently and might need educated, but there's certain things, just if you have to give people too many instructions on how to use the information, it goes out too widely, you're asking for trouble. You really want it to, you want it so that even if it's in print, somebody takes a picture of it and it shows up on the internet, that it's going to be okay, or more okay than not.
I think we got one more question here from Gary. He says, we're concerned about telling stories from one location that could put at risk workers in another location who share a common link to our organization. Can you speak to that issue?
That can be a difficult one. I know some people are concerned about that. And sometimes I think that this is more a matter of building trust with the people on the ground. Yeah, I think we'll need to work on building that trust. It just depends. It depends on how many organizations how many countries your organization is in. And I think if you tell enough about the surrounding countries, I don't think in actuality that people are going to figure out exactly where you are. You know, you can actually use there's all kinds of tools that are out there that are available to actually assess risk, so that you're not just talking about, well, this is their opinion and their fear, and this is our opinion and the way we want to shape it. You can use an impact probability chart. That's one of the things. Just do a Google search for it. And you can put in people's concerns and what it is you want to do, and just see how likely is it that this actually is a legitimate issue. And if you have people in your organization that work with security issues, invite them into the conversation. In the end, you need to have the trust of your colleagues on the ground, or otherwise they're going to be angry and upset that you've done it. What else?
I think that's the last question that we have here. So thank you so much, Heather, for walking us through this. And I found the case studies extremely helpful.
Great.
This webinar has been recorded, and it will be available to Mission Nexus members on the Mission Nexus website in the coming week. When you exit the webinar, you'll be asked to complete a very short evaluation. We value your input, so please fill it out. It should only take a minute or so. If you missed the previous webinar in this series with Liam Savage, be sure to check that out. He provided a great framework for getting to know your audience and addressing their needs. You'll find it in our digital media library at missionnexus.org/media. And as I mentioned earlier, I encourage you to join the communications cohort for directors and staff. You can find the cohort page under the program menu on missionnexus.org, or visit missionnexus.org/cohort. When you join this cohort, you can connect with other people engaged in marketing and communications for kingdom purposes. I look forward to seeing you there. So thank you to everyone who has joined and participated with us today. I am Curtis Amundsen, along with Mary Kay, our producer.